This is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at Sailor Ink Studio 224. Now this is an ink that on some papers it looks more gray, and then on other papers more of the purple shows up. And on Tomoe River you can see I'm seeing more of the purple, and look at that S. Isn't that cool? On my tissue that I wipe my pens off with, 224 is kind of a pale purple with a turquoise halo, whereas 252 was a dusty rose on paper, and it was kind of a powdery pink with a minty green halo, and 280 was an olive green that on my tissue was a mauve with a lime green halo. So these have been some interesting inks. They're fun to play with. And today I'm going to do a writing sample on Tomoe River paper. I'll be using a variety of pens and nib sizes ranging from a Pilot Extra Fine to a 1.5 stub nib, and I'll also take a look at some writing samples on other papers. I'm going to begin with my Pilot 78G Plus with that extra fine stainless steel nib. It feels kind of dry. It's not scratchy, but it does feel dry, and the fact that it looks so pale, I think kind of adds to that feeling of it not being very pleasant. So I'm going to say it just comes across as too dry. Next, I have my Caveco Skyline Sport, also with an extra fine nib. This is a nice match for this gray Skyline Sport. Not bad. Feels a little dry, but it's really nice looking. It's not unpleasant, not so dry that it's unpleasant. I'm going to say that it's, look at the chromatography you see when you do the ink smear. I'm going to say that this is nice but dry. And like I've mentioned before, this Caveco Sport, the longer you write, the drier it gets. The feed has trouble keeping up with it. It never gets to the point that it won't write, but if you write long enough, it doesn't put down this much ink. Next, I've got my Lamy Studio with a stainless steel fine nib. This one has been really dry with these inks. And it's putting down enough ink. It's legible. It feels a little dry, and you just don't get to see that interesting character of the ink. It's not putting down enough ink to be interesting. So I'm just going to say it's okay, but not enjoyable. Next, I've got my Twsbi Mini with a fine nib. And it feels a little bit smoother than the Lamy. And it seems to be putting down a little more ink. And there's enough blue to this ink that it looks good with my blue aluminum. Yeah, just quite a bit wetter. So I'm going to say this is nice, but it is kind of dry, kind of like the Caveco. But I don't have any problems with this pen getting drier as I write, and it's got that large ink reservoir. Next, I've got my Sailor LaCool with a medium fine nib. I've learned that this Sailor LaCool is more pleasant to use on less fountain pen friendly paper, which I guess that would kind of make sense. I think these are designed to be, introductory level pens, student pens, so that would make sense that they would be better suited to the more commonly available paper. Pretty dry, like the Lamy Studio. I'm just going to say this one, like the Lamy Studio, it's okay, it's usable. That medium fine line is very fine. Next, I've got my Platinum 3776, which has really been the outstanding pen for these Sailor inks that have been not very saturated. Sailor has their really highly saturated inks, but these last few inks I've been testing have been kind of like this one, not very saturated, but this 3776 with the 14 karat medium nib has just been outstanding on all paper types. I've really enjoyed it. It feels good on the paper. There's a little bit of feedback, but just enough to be pleasant. I like how it applies the ink to the paper nice and uniformly. It's applying enough ink that you can see the character of the ink, but it's not so wet that it becomes unpleasant to use on absorbent paper. Next, I've got my Pilot Stargazer with the medium nib. This is a very smooth, wet nib, and so unlike the Platinum, it's less pleasant to use on absorbent paper, but on paper like Tomoe River paper, it's very enjoyable. Very smooth. Very wet. And I've mentioned before, it's wet enough that I prefer to write on taller ruling. The Platinum works out nice on these really tight grids in this Hobonichi. And finally, I've got my Jinhao X750 with the 1.5 stub nib. Like the other inks, this one with some pens has a little trouble, the ink has a little trouble grabbing the paper, so you have to exert a little more pressure than I typically do. And you can see the chromatography on these X's. The pink soaks into the paper first, and that turquoise is what wipes off. Next, I'm going to do my little tweezer swatch. Okay, just dip it in the ink. I got quite a bit here. Hope this isn't too sloppy. While that dries, I'm going to take a look at some of the other writing samples. On Rhodia, it came across as more gray. It feels like a gray ink, or kind of a really cool gray ink. And you can see For like note taking, I don't think I would like this ink in most pens. You can see it looks kind of splotchy and the read back's not that great. The Skyline Sport was okay, but like I've mentioned, on an A5 sheet like this, by the time you got to the end, it would be writing kind of dry. It seems like the Twsbi was okay. It felt a little dry. It didn't feel dry. It just wrote a little dry, but that Twsbi has such a smooth nib that it was comfortable, but it comes out more pale than it does on the Platinum. The Platinum was my favorite. I would say the Platinum and the Stargazer. On this paper type, the grids on Rhodia, the grids are a little bit taller. They're 5 millimeters instead of 4. And just that extra room makes it more comfortable for me to write. So the Platinum or the Pilot medium nibs were my favorite. On 20-pound copy paper, again, it comes across as a cool gray ink. The bleed through wasn't bad. Now on the medium nibs, you started to see it. But let's see, what did the Platinum look like? The Platinum didn't bleed through too bad. Usually on copy paper, if you're writing with fountain pens, you're not going to be writing on the other side. So I think the Platinum was my favorite. It didn't feel sloppy. Didn't feel like you were writing with a magic marker. It was very pleasant. Okay, in my Leuchtturm, the little Leuchtturm writing sample, you can see this series of 3 Sailor Ink Studios that I've been highlighting. The shading just shows up really nicely. It's not too over the top. It's just very pleasant. And the ink smears are interesting, the multicolor ink smears. All right, and on my Tomoe River paper, you can see in the ink splotch at the beginning, maybe when it's where it's heavier, you can see the turquoise, and it almost comes across as green, a pale green, and the pink. And in the lighter areas, it just looks like a cool gray. Again, my favorite was the Platinum medium nib. That Platinum medium nib is just a good all-around nib for different paper types, and I guess for different ink types with this pale ink. I've always said my Pilot nibs were very forgiving with what ink type you use, and especially like the fine nibs on my Pilot Custom 74. Well, it turns out, as I've played with it more, the Platinum medium nib is also very forgiving. All right. I want to wish everybody a happy fountain pen day today, and if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.